Pacific time on August the 14th, 2020, almost halfway through August. Doesn't time fly when you're having fun, Keith?
It does indeed. It's just reminding me, it's my birthday on the 27th, coming up soon.
You're almost 60, right?
I'm not going to comment on that, but
looking up your age anyway. So mid-August 2020, Keith, it's hot out there. Should we be hustling as entrepreneurs or investors? What's going on this week?
It's an interesting week. Last week we talked about TikTok a lot, and to be honest, we could have talked about it this week as well because there's a heck of a lot happening. But I felt that in the interests of those who watch or listen to us, we should kick off with a good news story from Elizabeth Yin from Hustle VC.
Yeah, I gave you that intro and you missed it. I said, "Is this a week for hustling?" And you missed my hustle reference.
Oh, I made a big mistake, but
jumped on that one. You could have hustled. You're not a hustler, Keith.
I can make up for it by doing this.
Oh,
how about that?
Wow. That's like CNN. So this Elizabeth Yin. Elizabeth Yin is your kind of paradigmatic hustler. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, her firm is called Hustle VC. It's about 2 years old. She formed it with one other person. They're both Asian Americans. They spent 12 months-ish raising an $11.5 million fund. And she writes a very long narrative about everything she had to do to accomplish that. And, as somebody who's raised a lot of money in my time, I think I'm getting close to $500 million raised. I always say to people, it's really hard to raise money, and no one believes me. They think there's some kind of magic to it.
Well, I have to, I don't know who you're talking to, but as someone who has raised money, usually with a massive lack of success in the past, it's the hardest thing to do. And anyone who would disagree with that is clueless, who has no idea. Because getting someone to write you a check that you would put in your bank account and then use it either in your firm or to invest in other people, it requires a huge amount of trust and belief. It's an incredibly hard job.
Yeah. And even people who can afford to lose money, which is probably most investors in funds, nonetheless don't want to lose money. They want to make money. So
they're all hyper competitive, firstly. And secondly, just because you have a lot of money doesn't mean that you suddenly become more liberal with your cash.
Right. So Elizabeth documents how she did more than 350 meetings in less than a year. And she puts a graph of how successful she was. And for the first 6 months, she only had one commitment, which was a big commitment. It was $4 million. And only in the last month of the year did it go to the 11.5 million level. So she got so many no's and put so much effort in. And I thought it was a fairly typical story, and it's worth focusing on. By the way, the reason she did it, somebody on Twitter was whining that VCs never talk about how they raise money. So she responded, well, actually, I did. And the actual post is 2 years old, but I'd never seen it before. And I really think it's golden. So
and I was just watching the video she and her partner put out about what they do. And there's definitely a strong Asian American angle about how, and this is a theme you and I have talked about and everyone talks about all the time, of how white male-centric, sort of Stanford, Harvard-centric the investment community is. And her point is that Asian American investors and entrepreneurs were profoundly underrepresented and ignored and discriminated against, which is one of the reasons why she got into this game.
And what's even more interesting is she discloses that more than half of her fund came from non-American Asian investors that she didn't meet face-to-face. So it also focuses on the importance of a story and a narrative. She spent the first 3 months learning that her pitch was completely undifferentiated from any other fund that was pitching. And so she was tweaking her story almost every time she had a meeting, which looks like she had several a day sometimes.
Probably too many. I mean, I think one of the things, my guess is I've never raised a fund, but it's like doing online interviews. If you do too many, you lose your zest, your freshness, and it becomes pointless, counterproductive.
Well, I think that's true for you, and it's probably true for me. I don't get the impression it's true for her. I get the impression she grew into the raise and didn't resent the effort because she was convinced it was going to work, and it was just a question of time and improvement. So it's a really amazing work ethic.
It is amazing, although the only thing I would say is that in contrast with a lot of entrepreneurs, she'd made her money, and this was certainly an exciting and ambitious endeavor, but she doesn't need this to pay her bills. She doesn't have a big burn. So she was under, I think, slightly less pressure than the typical entrepreneur. Isn't that fair?
I'm not convinced that's true. Actually, I don't know her personal circumstances.
Well, she made, I mean, from my understanding, she and her partner made money as entrepreneurs independently from one another, and that's what drew them into the fund game. But
that can often give the wrong impression, Andrew. I mean, I've made money from things, decent amounts of money, but I can tell you the life of an entrepreneur is like a wave sign.
Well, you have a very high burn rate, Keith. You only drink champagne, right?
Red wine, actually, but
red wine, champagne, and you live in a palace in Palo Alto, so you have a particularly large burn.
By contrast, she slept on people's spare beds, so she definitely was not splashing money around as she traveled.
But in your view, you're an insider on this. You know the ups and downs of raising money, both as an entrepreneur and in terms of a fund. What's harder, raising money for a fund or raising money for your own startup?
They're very different because the investor base is different. They're both hard. I've tried to raise a fund. I've never told you the story, but I'll give you 1 minute. After TechCrunch was sold, I tried to raise. Actually, I started investing my own money with a friend, Kambiz Hushmand, and we were very successful. We went from 0 to 7 million net asset value in like 12 months, and then raised $700,000 of other people's money, and we got to something like 4x cash on cash and 12 times the investment base in net asset value in about 2.5 to 3 years. So we're doing very well. And I tried to raise a fund based off of that, 25 million. And even though I have a really quite a decent track record, I failed to raise a fund. You know why? I didn't know the investor base. You need to know family offices and wealthy individuals, and I didn't. So it was really hard just to even get in.
I know a number of other successful entrepreneurs or relatively successful entrepreneurs, high profile entrepreneurs who haven't succeeded in raising a fund. I mean, the reality is if you raise the fund, then you become the king of the jungle. Then you're only accountable to the fund managers, right?
Exactly. And I am part of a fund now. It's a $200 million fund in the UK, and we have a single investor, and that single investor obviously plays a major role in our day-to-day thinking. Right. There's no way around that. You're working for your investor to turn their money into at least 3x the money they gave you.
So anyway, so well done, Elizabeth Yin. We have a story that was the week that's purely good, purely positive, which is always encouraging. No controversy there. As you suggested, the Yin story also touches on architectural shifts in the digital and investment community. She raised a lot of money from Asia. And yet this week also, Keith, there's a lot of stories about this kind of, I don't know what you would call it, a paradox or a contradiction between the...
My dog's barking.
Yeah, the shifts in the global economy and national internet policy. Is there Is there a growing clash between government policy and globalized capital and technology flow?
Well, the way I think of it is, and the story you're referring to is a great story from the Internet Governance Project, criticizing Pompeo and Trump for wanting to get off the internet being global, and of course their perspective being very national. And I think that focuses in on a major fact of our times, which is productive forces, are increasingly globalized. What do I mean by productive forces? I mean, everything that's produced is produced anywhere and sold everywhere, especially with digital products.
Right. So the iPhone is the classic example. Right?
Correct. So the idea that nation states can police what are effectively things that are out of their control is unlikely to end in a good place. And the TikTok ban, in quotes, because it hasn't happened yet, is a great one. I mean, my prediction is TikTok will just ignore it. And the point this article makes is, will the police go around and force everyone to uninstall TikTok? Not very.
Well, maybe not in America, but they will not. Well, the Russian government or the Chinese government are much more. The Iranian government are much more effective. As you said, we don't want this to become a TikTok show. But what about the rumors on Twitter? I was kind of intrigued by those. And it seems like a much more natural match, even if the economics in it are challenging, than Microsoft.
It is more natural. That said, Twitter has a long history of incompetence in product development. Vine was basically TikTok, and they closed it down. And so they, as a young company, they found it very, very difficult to juggle more than one ball at a time, and often even found it difficult to juggle one ball. So I think the chances of Twitter's market cap being able to afford buying TikTok are fairly unlikely, even though it makes more sense.
Yeah, and the piece one of the pieces you refer to by our old friend Om Malik is about the curious relationship between TikTok and Apple, and why the critique of, or the American government attack on TikTok is in some ways an attack on Apple. Om also has another interesting piece this week on the future of work, which we can be thinking of also in the context of another old friend, Albert Wenger's piece about the challenges and opportunities and problems with Marxism. So what's happening with the future of labor and the future of Marxist theory, Keith?
Well, so Ohm uses this graph. This is unemployment in the U.S. going up, extremely rapidly over. Employment going up rapidly over a long period of time, and suddenly crashing with coronavirus, and now beginning to creep back up. And the point he's making is in the context of Uber and Lyft possibly having to close down operations in California due to the ruling that their drivers are actually employees, not contractors. So Ohm's entire piece, which is a really good piece, says that it's about time that there was more than two kinds of work, employment or contracting, because there's this massive gray area in the middle that the gig economy has produced, where you might predominantly work with a single brand, but you're definitely self-employed, and you're not an employee and you're not a contractor. You're working for yourself, and to kind of steal one of Marx's famous quotes, you could be an Uber driver in the morning, a Lyft driver in the afternoon, and deliver food in the evening. And that.
So your part, to borrow some more Marxist language, rather than the proletariat, this is the precariat, people who are working on all the different platforms, and then to borrow another Marxist phrase, the precariat have nothing to lose but their Toyota Priuses. Is that one way of looking at it, Keith?
It is, but I think Ohm is probably too short-sighted. Ohm, sorry if you're listening to this, but I think personally the gig economy is a transitional step to no work. I think almost every gig economy job will ultimately be automated.
I think that makes sense. And that leads us on nicely to our friend Albert Wenger, who was one of the original investors and supporters in Andrew Yang's initiative to run for president. Albert is also, and I have him on my How to Fix Democracy show coming up, him and his wife, Suzanne Danziger, talking about their minimum income initiative in upstate New York in Hudson. So Albert, as a partner in Union Square Ventures, a very successful venture capitalist, but he's also quite a profound thinker on the future of capitalism. In fact, he has a new book out, or an ongoing new book out, called The World After Capital. So what's Albert's thinking on both work and the future of Marxism, Keith?
So Albert's piece this week is a defensive reaction to attacks on him. Where he
was attacking Albert. He's the nicest guy. It's like attacking a sheep.
Poor Albert. I don't think he's just a sheep. You know, the word sheep doesn't go well in a venture capitalist world, you realize.
Well, he's not an aggressive fellow.
No, he's not. He's a lovely fellow. Anyway,
talking about sheep, you remember, again, if we're going to get all historical and theoretical, Thomas More's comment in Utopia about sheep eating men in 15th century English agriculture, which is similarly what AI now is doing to, or what you will predict AI will do to hamburger workers and drivers.
So Albert is, he makes a couple of points. The first thing is he wants to make clear to everyone he's not a Marxist. And he secondly wants to make
Which
clear
means he is one. Anyone who says they're not one is one.
And then the second thing is he wants to make the point that Marxism, he considers Marxism dangerous. But he also makes the point that poor capitalism is leading to a renewed interest in Marxism. And so he basically sets up this thought context of bad capitalism leads to a re-interest in Marxism, which is dangerous. And then he wants to posit his own kind of alternative. Now, the reasons he thinks Marxism are dangerous, I think, are wrong. He makes the point that Marxism can't scale because central planning can't scale. And, you know, Albert, of all people, should know that with blockchain and the cloud and computing, you could totally scale central planning. The problem isn't scaling at all. The problem is actually how do you replace so let me put this in context. I think capitalism can get to a place where there is no or very little wage labor, which is the essence of capitalism. So it's kind of not capitalism anymore if there's no wage labor, which is one of Albert's points. Now, then you need to focus on ownership. If there's no wage labor, well, then who owns production? Because no one's employing anybody. It's all robots and automation. And I think that question of who owns production, there are really only two answers: individuals or everybody. If it's individuals, then it's some kind of fiendish capitalism. And if it's everybody, it's some kind of communism. And there really isn't anything in between those two in my mind, by the way. And I think it's very likely the human race eventually gets to everybody owns everything. And universal basic income and devices like that are how we measure buying capacity and so on. In that sense, I think Marx is a really relevant person to read still, despite all the failings of communist movement.
Yeah, I have two responses to this. On the one hand, it sounds ludicrous, particularly given the developments in the economy over the last 6 months, where, I don't know, whatever it is, 60-70% of the American economy now is dominated by about 5 companies. On the other hand, coming back to Marx, of course, didn't see the state as being the final stage. He saw the state as as the means by which you redistribute ownership or you socialize or communize ownership. So I'm not sure what Albert's reading. I mean, his version of communism or Marxism is not a Marxist version. It's a Leninist one, which is not Marxism.
Well, I'd correct you one notch more. It's a Stalinist one. It's not even a Leninist one.
Poor Albert, Keith. Now I said he was a sheep and you defended him. Now you're saying Albert's a Stalinist?
No, I'm not. I'm saying his interpretation of Marxism is using the Stalinist version of Marxism as his critique base. And Marxism and Stalinism are not the same thing.
No, and I agree. And it's no coincidence. I think Albert's, I don't know if he's right, but he's correct to say that the problems with capitalism are resulting in a new interest in Marxism. Richard Wolff, who's probably America's leading Marxist thinker, economist, we interviewed him on How to Fix Democracy. And we interviewed a lot of famous people, including Madeleine Albright and all sorts of other people. And Richard Wolff is still the most popular interview. So there is a great deal of interest. And finally, Keith, what would that was the week be if we didn't mention your superhero, Paul Graham? And you always manage to get him in somehow. I don't know what your relationship is with Paul Graham, but it's something we probably can't talk about in front of children. What's Paul been up to this week when it comes to the tweet of the week?
Well, the first thing I should say is I don't really know Paul. I've met him once where he was having breakfast with one of his children at Joni's on California Street here in Palo Alto. And I said hi, and he vaguely knew who I was because his wife and my wife know each other in a work context. But he really doesn't know me. I have no relationship to him.
Paul, if you're listening, Keith loves you.
But this week he's consistently over the last few weeks been focused in on cancel culture, and the tweet of the week this week points to an article which is 6 signs that you're being cancelled, and it's a great article because it basically shows the difference between being criticized and being cancelled, and the six things that you need to look out for is, firstly, people being more punitive than normal. Secondly, deplatforming you, that is to say, implying that you shouldn't be allowed to speak. Thirdly, organizing others to join in. Fourthly, calling for secondary boycotts of you in other environments. Fifth, moral grandstanding, where the person claims to be on a higher moral ground than you. And then finally, what the author calls truthiness, which is something I have yet to understand. But those are the 6 things. He makes the point, if in your case, 2 or 3 of them are part of what you're experiencing, you're probably being cancelled. And if it's more than 4, you're definitely being cancelled.
My response to that is that this is the ultimate storm in the teacup, and it tends to be incredibly relevant for academics. And perhaps next week we can talk about Scott Galloway and his reading of the future of the university and university labor, because most of the people being quote unquote uncancelled, if they really are, they're coming from the university, which is already archaic enough. So I just don't buy this cancel culture. There's a paranoia. The piece you're referring to was published on Yascha Mounk's Persuasion site, which is interesting, but I just don't see it as affecting anyone outside a few conservatives in the university. You're not seeing it. I mean, no one's canceling anyone in the Valley, are they?
Well, people in Valley are very careful what they say, so they don't get.
We're always careful what we say. This idea that we haven't been careful in the past. Everyone has biases on gender, on race, on religion, and we're usually careful to keep it to ourselves because we know it's inappropriate and often very impolite. So I don't see any difference now.
No, I think there is a difference, Andrew, which is the people who are seeking to cancel are people who we intuitively want to support. So I want to support transgender people of all persuasions. I want to support women's rights. I want to support gay rights. I want to support Black Lives Matter. So my intuition is to support. Now, if those who are oppressed or downtrodden try to cancel out other people, then it's really hard to speak out against them because you intuitively support them, but you must speak out against them. More important than anyone else, actually.
Well, I don't.
Well, that's because